the other side of toxic Christianity, I found myself faced with one question. Now what? This podcast is about that question. We have conversations with folks who are asking themselves the same things. We're picking up the pieces of a fractured and fragmented faith. We're finding treasure in what the church called trash, beauty and solidarity in people and places we were told to fear, reject, and dismiss. I'm Cami Minehart, and this is Life After Leaven. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to this episode of Life After Leaven. I'm your host, Cami Minehart, and I'm joined by my good friend, my daughter's godmom, Cami Minehart. And so I'm just so excited. So I'm going to have you tell us who you are, tell us where you're from, tell us what you do, and then we'll jump into the topic, which I'm so excited about. Who are you? Where are you from?
Hi, I'm Cami Minehart. I am from San Diego, born and raised there. I moved out to DC for grad school for work. I'm a sign language interpreter. Went to Gallaudet, had a great experience at Gallaudet, and I also met my wife there. And we've settled in DC and are living our best life here.
Living your best life. Oh my gosh. So I really wanted to have you on. What I love about our friendship is like we have like deep conversations all the live long day. And so I know a little bit about your story and kind of I want the audience to kind of get a feel for where I'm taking this episode and what we're going to talk about. So, we use this concept of leaven, where leaven is patriarchy, it's white supremacy, it's toxic religion, toxic Christianity. So what I ask people on the front end is kind of like, what was life like for you before you unleavened? Meaning like before you recognized toxicity and like moved out, what was life like for you? Were you a person of faith? Like what was going on for you?
So I was, how do I say this? It's almost like when you have immigrants to the US and then you're like the first generation born here, like that's what I was with my faith. My parents were hippies. My dad grew weed. Like they were like, my mom had been divorced. Like they were not like a classically Christian religious family. So I didn't have that heritage. But my mom got saved shortly after I was born. She was kind of like looking to clean up her life, looking for some sort of direction. She found the evangelical church. And when I was young, I opted into coming with her. My dad was not saved at the time. And then over time, we evolved into a very conservative homeschool family. I was homeschooled from second grade on. And before that, I went to a conservative Christian private school. And I was deeply involved in the church. And while my parents started that journey for me, my mom in particular, like I leaned into it heavy. We started, like she read the Bible to us every day. I served food to the homeless with my mom as like an elementary school kid. We were involved in parachurch organizations and church ministry from young. And then when I was in my teens and 20s, I really dove into it. I was a leader in ministry. I even went through pastoral training, became a pastor, and served in that capacity in deaf ministry in particular for most of my life until I moved to DC. And that was kind of the start of my unleavening process. Being in a kind of high control religion, high control authoritarian family my whole life, and being a single woman who didn't move out of the family until I got married. My life stayed very kind of the same, right? I graduated, started working. I lived in a little like apartment on my family's property, but I lived at home with my family, like very integrated, very enmeshed in the family until I decided to move to DC for grad school. I was 29 at the time, just a few years ago. And that was the beginning. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the beginning of like my unleavening, my deconstruction, because I met amazing new people, diverse people who challenged my worldview. I started with a master's program, but then by the time I started my PhD program, 2 out of the 4 of us were queer. That was not including me at the time. Like my professors had pronouns in their bios and all this stuff that was like challenging my worldview. And these were really incredible people. And at the time, the politics of the world kind of started going crazy. Trump came into office or started campaigning, and that was really the beginning of the end. According to your book, it was a lot for you. It was for a lot of people I know. I couldn't reconcile it anymore. So that's when I started deconstructing. And then I'd already stopped going to church
Mhm.
regularly. Um, was trying to give language to what I was going through at the time. I was saying things like, I feel like my faith is like a house that was built poorly and I need to tear it down. I
Mhm.
was identifying some of the things like racism and
Mhm.
just discrimination in general and toxicity. But I didn't know where I wanted to go from there, but I didn't think I could leave the faith, right? Like it was my
Right.
everything. I
Right.
was so beyond all in.
Mhm.
So I said it was like the bones are good, right? The foundation's still there. I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna rebuild. And then I fell in love with my best friend.
Mm.
And I was still believing we were gonna rebuild, we were gonna figure it out, I was gonna stay in the faith. Um, but the pushback I got trying to be doing that as a queer person
Mhm.
was too much. And it
Mhm.
was ultimately that pushed me entirely out of the Christian faith. And I now identify as spiritual.
Mhm. Here.
I I
I
kind of
identify as here.
yeah, I'm like just a person having like a spiritual experience and a physical experience. Like I had to heal my relationship with my body first and
Mhm.
like become more grounded and more present in here and now. And then after that, now I'm starting to explore other avenues of spirituality because that connection is still there and I still believe that there's something out there. So
Wow.
yeah.
Yes. So these are things that these are elements, but I learn new things in hearing that. And I can't decide whether I want you to tell the story of you and your wife or if I want you to talk to us about the book.
We could
Let's
do both.
have you, yeah. Tell I just because I want these people to hear this story. This story is incredible. Tell the story, just like tell the like almost Cliff Notes version of you and E.
So when people ask me and Alyssa or E, my wife, how we met, we like to freak everyone out by saying, "Oh, conservative Christian pastor." We were both going to the same Bible study on campus, and the pastor introduced us because we both expressed interest in some kind of like women's Bible study, which is so funny. So we clicked along with her roommate at the time, and still our good friend Bree. We became besties, the three of us.
Sorry, shut up.
I agree. And we did like life together very intensely. Like I had a key to their house. I helped Bree through surgery. Like I would drive E to work. We would like we got adopted a dog together, right? We were as close gets. And I had literally got to the point where I was like, oh, I don't need to date. I don't need a partner because I have what I'm looking for in friendship.
Mhm.
And it wasn't long before that I could keep believing that before I started realizing I was in love with her. And so I spent 6 months kind of wrestling with that while I was wrestling with my faith and my identity.
Mm.
And COVID happened. The whole world shut down, right? Within a week. I was teaching, I was a PhD student, and I was working full time, and everything went remote overnight.
Mhm.
And I was living in a tiny basement apartment. And there was no way I could isolate there alone for who knows how long. At that point, we thought it was going to be a couple of weeks, right? So I was like, I can't live in that basement apartment with no desk and no table, no office and do all these things for
Yeah.
a couple of weeks. So I decided to fly home to California. Um, and literally that day, I had been journaling saying, like, you know what? I'm pretty sure it's just, I don't know, daddy issues. Lissa reminds me of whatever. Like, we're good. We're friends. But so I was I was still wrestling. And that was that moment that he was like, I can't let her go without kissing her. And
Mhm.
her thought process did not extend beyond that. But so basically, that's what happened. She kissed me. And I said, let's talk about it. And she said, oh God, no, can't we just keep kissing? And that's kind of where we left it. I flew to California.
Mhm.
After we had said, well, we're Christians and our family can't know, we can't ever do this again. But here, let's kiss a couple more times before you fly
Mhm.
away.
Mhm.
And then we just kept talking. We spent 2 months virtual, talking over FaceTime, building a really strong foundation to
Mhm.
our relationship. And after not even a month in, we were like, you know what, this is real. And we love each other and we want to do this. And so while we were still remote and still apart, we came out to our families. I was living with my family at the time. I don't recommend it. PSA, if you're ever living with people who are not, aren't going to be super cool about you being queer, don't tell them at that time. Yeah. And so eventually, I kept waiting for COVID to get better to come home. It did
Yeah.
not get better. As we all know, this was 2020, like May 2020.
Yeah.
Finally, I said, I've had enough. And I flew home to DC anyway. And we started dating. And within a couple months, we bought a house. And then, you know, month or two later, we were already like talking about being engaged. Like, and then, we got engaged, we got married, but we knew like it took so much for us to come out, and it changed our life so much that like, but then I had spent so long knowing I loved her and knowing something was off in my life,
Mm-hmm.
that once we were in, we were in.
Yeah.
And we're ridiculously happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and anybody that is around you, like the thing I love. So if you've read Faith Unleavened, then at the end of the book, this is the Cami and Alyssa that I'm talking about, the Minehart family, the space that you created. And so, just side note for everybody, to know my partner Ellison went to college with Cami and E, and so that's how I know and got grafted into this like incredible family that has taught me so much about ASL, about sexuality, about gender, about spirituality. Like this family is just what you've created. It makes so much sense to me in light of like knowing the kind of ministry stuff you did before and
Mhm.
seeing how like free we can be, like when the toxicity is gone, those elements of like community and stuff, like they remain. And I really really love that about the space that you created, and I'm just excited to be a part of the My Heart fam. Okay, so let's get to it. So you are working on a book,
Yes.
and you told me about it, I don't know, maybe 5 6 months back we talked about
Mhm.
it, and then we've been talking about it since then. So I want you to tell the people what this book is about, and then I will jump in and question. So take all the time you need. Give us
Okay.
the book and where it goes and the point of it and all of that, and I want to jump in when I have a question.
Okay. Well, I guess to start, I've always loved to write. Like I've always journaled and stuff. And then I spent all this time in academia writing research articles. I got research articles published. Like I've always liked to write. I've always been good at it. And when I decided academia wasn't for me and I left my PhD program and stopped working on my dissertation, I had this like vacuum of time and mental energy and space. And at the same time, I was still going through a lot emotionally and I was processing a lot of those things. And so I started writing. And one of the things that I wrote that ended up being really meaningful was this book that I've technically written a whole ass book. It's like 50,000 words. It's sitting on my laptop being like, do something with me. But this book is called And She Was Known, and it's the untold story of Solomon's harem. And it was important to me that Solomon was not the primary title because, right, the whole point is that we're talking about the women of Solomon's harem, who none of them are named in the Bible, not even a really important character
Mhm.
who's referred to. I guess if you consider it the same person, which I've decided, or like I've randomly decided, I'm combining these two biblical references into one character.
Mhm.
I've got the Song of Solomon, who talks about like the Shulamite. It's written to a lover.
Mhm.
And then there is the daughter of Pharaoh, who's the only wife of Solomon's mentioned explicitly in the
Mhm.
Bible. She doesn't even get a name. She got a whole palace. Solomon built her an entire fucking palace, but she doesn't get named by any of the authors of that history.
Shocking.
Um, but basically, it started, and I can't remember if you were in the first conversation or maybe the second, but we love to talk about all things faith and queerness and spirituality,
Mhm.
you, me, Cody.
Mhm.
And
Hi, Cody.
we had been, hi, Cody. There was a couple of kind of funny things that we'd been thinking about. One of them was like, maybe Mary was a lesbian, Mary, mother of Jesus, because like she, like, according to like the Orthodox version of the faith, right? She remained a virgin. And I'm like, well, that's just a fancy way of saying probably a lesbian. Anyway, like those kind are the kind of things we talk about in
Yes,
these groups.
exactly. Yes.
And one of the things I started talking about was like, think about Solomon, think about this harem. It says that there were 300 wives and 700 concubines. That's 1,000 women to one man. Just do the math. Like, how many of them actually saw him?
Mhm.
And they had literally no other responsibilities other than to come when he was called. So you've got all these gorgeous women living in the lap of luxury with no responsibilities, just being taken care of, living together. Like, you gotta think that some of them were getting it on. Like, some of them had
Yeah.
to be queer.
Yeah. Statistically, I mean.
Statistically. It's kind of fun to think about. I'd always read scripture with such a very strict interpretive lens that it was very liberating after not being able to even open a Bible for like a year to come
Mhm.
back to the Bible and reread first
Mhm.
things and the story of Solomon and be like, what's actually there and
Mhm.
what's not? And what's there that I was told meant something, but maybe it doesn't mean that. Maybe it could mean something else.
Mhm.
So I've written a story where several of the women in Solomon's harem are queer. They have a whole ass community. Um, Solomon uh, is into mushrooms and weed and psychedelics, and that is where his wisdom comes from. That's where the proverbs are based off of.
Mhm.
He doesn't give a fuck about running the kingdom. He just wants to like have fun and talk about ideas and build the temple and do his arty little architecture things. And the Queen of Sheba is a dominatrix.
This is so awesome. Oh my gosh, this is
And
amazing.
it really started as just like a fun little thing. Like, so Elissa and I, because we started dating long distance, um, and we were exploring all of the realities of attraction and queerness when I hadn't explored any actual attraction and physical intimacy. I had kissed one guy once. The first time I kissed someone, I was 29 years old.
Mhm.
The closest thing I had to a sexual encounter was um, spending the night making out with a guy with our underwear on. And this was as a 30-year-old woman. Because I was so deeply repressed. And so, like, when we started dating, that was my only experience at
Mhm.
all. I
Mhm.
never, like, I had no concept, right? And I didn't even know how to tap into that part of myself. Like, my sexuality was like a squashed bug, like, there was nothing there.
Mm. Mhm.
But I was deeply in love with who she was as a person.
Mhm.
And there was attraction there. I just didn't know what to call it or how to
Yeah.
express it. So when we started dating long distance, we wrote each other these stories. And we sometimes together wrote these stories. I would write out these fantasies about what we were going to do when
Mhm.
we finally got together.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes it was as simple as like kissing or
Mhm.
touching. And so our relationship started through, and my introduction to queer eroticism started with the written word.
Mm.
We then moved on to like some, you could call it sexting. I mean, it was mostly like maybe pictures of cleavage. Like we were very conservative still. We were figuring it out, right?
Risque.
We felt very, very brave the first time. Like I took off my shirt with a bra on, took off my shirt on FaceTime. We called it sex timing. We thought we were so like adventurous. Uh, um, but like that was kind of how we started our relationship, was talking about
Mhm.
like sex, talking about desire.
Mhm.
Um, and so she still loves it when I tell her stories or I remind her of memories. That's very much a part of our sexual life.
Mhm.
So this kind of started like the very first chapter is a sex scene.
Mhm.
Granted, it starts with Solomon and Elisheva is the main character.
Mhm.
It kind of starts with her because that's her introduction to this whole world. Like she gets picked out off the street by Solomon. He sleeps with her and then he sends her to the harem.
Mhm.
And so I really started writing this story for Elissa. And like she would read it chapter by chapter as I read it. She loved the spicy scenes. Like we talk about it, we kiss about it, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
and it was her who really told me it was good and was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I love it. And she would be so mad if I left it on any kind of cliffhanger. At the end of the chapter, she was like, well, what's coming next? You have to. So I wrote chapter after chapter, night after night for her.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So you think about this, and this is like kind of the tradition of like midrash
Yeah.
and like the thing that people don't understand a lot of times about midrash is like we really are not given very many details. We're given like little jumping off points, and the scripture is supposed to like spark imagination. Like that's
Yeah.
the like purpose of it. So when you were writing this, what were you thinking would be, were you writing this with like a goal, or were you just writing this after it stopped being just about Alyssa and you were gonna like produce this? Was there a goal in mind? Do you have something in mind that you would want the reader to take away, or is it just like I'm giving this gift of prose? Like how are you feeling it? Are you feeling it like a is it do you want it to function a certain way as people read for them?
I love that question. And I love both perspectives. So I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think partially it's like for me, it was exercising creativity in a
Mhm.
new way.
Yeah.
When I kind of reached burnout and I stopped over producing and over serving capitalism in my life.
Mhm.
Basically meaning I stopped my PhD program.
Yeah, I was
Um,
gonna ask you about if you wanted to
yes.
talk about that, why you stopped.
Yes. So I started, yeah, this is a good segue. So I started the graduate program with a master's. It was a 1 year master's. I was so deeply entrenched and enmeshed in my home family that I was not willing to leave home for more than a year. I mean, this was 9 months basically. And I made sure that there was going to be the option to go home after the first semester and do the last part remote if I couldn't hack it, right? To by the end of that, I was starting to grow and change, and I was starting to break some of those unhealthy ties. And I knew I needed to stay, but I could not justify it to myself or my family to not go home unless I kept being in grad school. And I was a very gifted,
Yeah.
like, servant of people and people pleaser. Like, I'm a very good writer. I'm very good at doing all the academic things, right?
Mhm.
So it was very easy for me. And everyone's like, "You're a perfect candidate for a PhD." And I'm like, "Well, that would make me sound very smart and
Mhm.
like successful as a, single, unmarried woman
Mhm.
without a husband and children. I didn't have a lot to say show for myself and my community. So I thought, well, if you have to call me doctor, maybe you'll stop asking me when I'm going to get married.
That part.
So
Love it.
I started this PhD program. It was one of the best decisions I ever made, second only to leaving the PhD program.
Mhm.
I met amazing people. I had incredible cohort. I had incredible professors, and I learned so much through the coursework
Mhm.
process. I did research projects with other people alone for coursework. I published those, and then I got to the dissertation phase. And by that point, in the middle of my PhD program, I had 2 different surgeries. I got very ill, and then I met Alyssa. I came out. I went no contact with my family. Like, so much happened. And so
Mhm.
when I started this program, it was a reason to stay in DC, and it was something to do with my life since I clearly wasn't cut out for the traditional Christian
Mhm.
housewife role. And by the time I was working on my dissertation and kind of spinning my wheels and just totally burned out, I realized, like, my life looks so different now. I have a personal life that I have a wife I want to come
Yeah.
home to, or like at that point, if like a girlfriend or a fiance I want to come home to.
Yeah.
I don't want to grade students' papers every night. I don't want to like I knew the life of the academic, and it's a beautiful thing, but it is also a very exploitative thing, and I did not want to be exploited in
Mm.
that way. And I literally had my one of my most trusted professors that I sat down and talked about all of it with, and she was like, "Yeah, yeah, get out while you can." Once you have the PhD, you're kind of stuck. There's expectations. We've invested in you. You kind of have to do the thing. So get out now. And I did.
Wow.
It was the best thing I ever did.
Wow. That's incredible that the professor would be that upfront about it. That's awesome.
Yes. She was also recently retired, which probably helped.
So she was like, I'm out too. So speaking of exploitation, Solomon's harem. Uh,
Yeah.
so like we're I'm a reader. I'm going to pick up your book. I don't know. I don't want to say some really cool like kitschy like bookstore. I go in, I get, and she was known.
Mhm.
I read it, and at the end of it, like, what are you wanting me to feel?
Something I say in like the afterword is that I kind of want to challenge people to think about in the tradition of midrash, right, of what's possible.
Hmm.
And one of the things I say is that I'm not trying to convince anyone that there were queer women in Solomon's harem. This is entirely fiction. I
Hmm.
am hoping that you'll walk away from this recognizing it was possible.
Hmm.
I believe queer people have been here through antiquity. Like, the more and
Hmm.
more research we're doing, we find that nature is more queer than we thought, that history is more queer than we thought. We've been reading our biases into it all along.
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm hoping that this is kind of like an interesting,
Hmm.
just as an interesting perspective for people. I also hope they enjoy it. I hope that they find it hot and they have great sex after reading it with their
Hey,
partners or
that,
strangers or whatever they're into themselves. Um, uh, and I'm also hoping to kind of open up the Bible and the stories of the Bible for people who are not religious or
yeah,
people who are formerly religious.
it's awesome. Yeah.
Something that I realized through this process was this was super healing for me and my connection with the Bible, to be like, I don't have to read this the same way I used to. Like, shortly after Alyssa and I had kissed and admitted we were in love, and I was trying to figure it out, and I'd come out to my mom, like, I spent all night reading Romans 8 and Romans 11 and like literally just like self-harm via Bible.
Mhm.
Um,
That's
And that's
exactly
why I had to walk away from it, right? So I'm hoping that people, through this really more accessible, kind of like fun, interesting, erotic fantasy world, can be reintroduced to the Bible and realize that the Bible does not belong to the evangelicals. It does not belong to the MAGA people. It doesn't belong to Catholics or to anyone. The
Mhm,
Bible's for anyone.
mhm,
And whether you're a history scholar or you're just interested in the stories, you don't have to, there's no right way to read it or to take it. And
mhm,
so I guess that's my hope.
mm,
And
mm.
like putting more queer lit out there is always good for the world. So
Absolutely. I mean, as a result of our conversations and my whole thing about like, oh my gosh, Joseph, like thinking
yes.
about, and I just like thinking about Jacob and Joseph and being like, oh my gosh, this makes so much more sense when you think about it from a queer perspective.
Mhm.
Like this makes so much more sense to me, and we'll talk about that another time because I want to have you give people the last three questions because those parts, that part is the part that is in every single episode, and I'm like, we can do that, and then I want to know if maybe after the book comes out you'll come back,
I
because
would
that
love
way you can give us some more like material. I don't want you to give any of the material away. I mean, I know about the material.
that.
Y'all gonna have to buy the
I,
book.
I love the way you're manifesting the book gets published by saying that because right, I have a lot of trauma from editing. Like I spent a year editing the same proposal for my dissertation and not getting anywhere, spinning my wheels. So when I finished writing the book, I hit a hard stop. Like it was super hard for me to go back to it.
Hmm.
And then just today, I've signed up for, like, in the little tiny bit I've done, I signed up for some person who helps people get their books published, like their email. And
Hmm.
I happened to open it and it happened to list some agents who are looking for submissions. And there was someone who like fit my description to a T. Like,
Come
so
on.
I don't even know if this is the person, but the fact that when I was like, who's going to want this? It's like biblical historical fiction, but it's also explicit and erotic and queer but it's also not smut. Like it is, I like to think as someone who's highly educated, it's
It's
pretty intelligent and like interesting read. There's like a plot and all. It's not just
mm,
boobies.
yeah.
So
It's
like
like it's
who's
like
gonna want this?
sophisticated and like sultry. It's really, to have it be so sexy and smart is such a like, and you're just a fantastic writer, but like just the parts that I've read, it's like, my gosh, like this is, it's definitely gonna get published.
That's
Like,
my hope. And now that I've like seen that there's literally someone who's like, I want historical fiction focusing on overlooked characters. I want things not afraid to call itself feminist, and I want queer authors. And I'm like, oh my God, that's me. That's this book. And it
wow.
just kicked me into gear. And so I like literally got on Google and I'm like, how do you submit a book to an agent? And like, oh, I have to write a cover letter. Well, today I wrote a cover letter and a
Yeah.
synopsis. And I sent the book to, or like I sent those things to an editor. And I'm like, oh, I gotta find an editor. So I'm actually kicked into gear again. And it's cool that it coincided with this podcast. This conversation also helped
Yeah.
me into gear about it. So yeah,
Wow.
I'm really excited. And I do hope that it gets out there and I'm gonna actually do the work to make that happen. So
Yeah.
yes, when
And
it's
we're gonna be
published,
here
I'll
cheering
be
you on. When you come back and the book is published, we'll all get to, celebrate and drink wine and everything. Okay, last three questions for you. So first, what are you bringing from the rubble? So is there
back.
anything worth keeping from the life you had before you unleavened?
Mhm.
So we'll have you answer that first, and then is there anything that you're binging?
Ooh.
So I've been binging Ultimatum. I finished it, but I
Oh, I
like
just
binging.
finished it too.
Oh my
I
gosh,
watched the whole thing yesterday.
I'm a
It's
letdown.
freaking toxic. Oh, I had to fast forward through a lot. Okay, it's triggering for me because it's set in San Diego. They never say it, but I know. I grew up there. It
Oh,
is set in San Diego, so it is so incredibly familiar to me.
oh wow.
And it's so incredibly triggering. The amount of gaslighting that happened on that show, like I had to skip through most of the conversations.
Oh, you talking about? I know which one you're talking about too. But what's her name with the
Oh
Oh,
man, I'm terrible with names, but Vanessa was like she was transparently kind of gross, but like
yeah.
I was kind of okay with her by the end. I thought Xander came in so sweet and innocent, and then I saw such a different side of them by the end, and that was kind of sad.
Hmm.
Um, but
Hmm.
yeah, no, it was the Tiff and then Tiff's partner who I can't think of. I
Oh,
hated the way that person treated Tiff.
oh man, yeah. Mildred.
Mildred.
Yeah.
Mildred.
That show, I was like, and then you get to the end and you're like, what? What was this? Anyway,
Yeah.
so
So
yes,
yeah,
okay, so what are
that's
you
the answer
binging?
to that one. That's what I've been binging.
I'm sorry, I was like, I haven't got to talk to you about it yet. And the last question is like words to live by. So tell us what you're
Mm.
bringing, and then just give us some words to live by.
So what I'm bringing is I think one of the things I think about when I'm thinking about what I'm bringing is like one of the like very reactionary, like I'm no longer Christian, is like science and facts and logic, and a lot of people I see kind of move over into atheism for a while,
Mhm,
um, or stay in atheism, and that's fine. But I often see the same kind of militant, I need to convince people
mhm.
approach, like evangelizing atheism the same way I evangelize Christianity.
That's good.
And so, when I kind of got over my initial pushback, I was able to go back to some of like the memories and the experiences I had in Christianity that were beautiful,
Mhm,
particularly some of the more mystical spiritual aspects of it. So, like how prayer feels,
mhm,
not necessarily what prayer is. Like I believed and I prayed for healing and all of those things.
mhm,
Um, there's not anything I can point to in that experience that was I could actually say was like a qualified miracle. But I the way that it felt to pray and to believe for things, I
mhm,
find that same kind of energy to be really healing and really beautiful in other ways, whether it's meditating with crystals or in conversation with friends. Like that level of connection to something higher, I think is really beautiful. And the same way, like we used to feel it with worship music. Oh, I loved worship. I was the one with my hands in the air, singing as loud as I can off key. Uh, and then, like, just this week, we went to an Ed Sheeran concert.
yeah.
And he was singing about really deep, vulnerable, beautiful things, telling the story of his wife getting cancer and his best friend dying. And so
Mhm,
that connection to emotion, emoting and expressing,
mhm,
um, like you can't, like there's no way around. You have to go through emotions, which is something I didn't really know how to do well.
mm,
So, and that music can be a beautiful way to go through things, and doing it communally
mhm,
is a really beautiful thing. And so other than a handful of like concert experiences, I don't know how to replicate that. We used to do these worship nights where just a friend who was a very talented musician with his guitar, um, and he definitely had a deep spiritual connection too, just like ushered this living room full of people into this incredible state of like euphoria. And I think about like when we've done mushrooms together, I don't know if we can say that in here, but like in
mhm.
those kind of states, that same kind of feeling and entering into a different space, and the way that music can facilitate that. And I think that's something I want to keep and I want to explore more.
Mhm. Welcome. Got to meet my friends.
Yeah.
Man, any last things? Any places people can find you? Where can they look you up if they want to find you and follow the journey of the book?
I had an Instagram for the book when I was planning on publishing a very different, much more vulnerable book. I had a pseudonym, and at this point, I'm not moving forward with that book because this book is way more interesting and more fun to read, honestly.
Mhm.
So I need like a website and like I don't know an Instagram. My Instagram's private, so
Yeah.
at this point there isn't anything that anyone can follow, but that will be coming at some point. At this
Y'all
point, it's just
can follow
me
me.
and my laptop. Come up to me
Follow
and
me.
let know when something cool happens. At this point, it's just you and me in the kitchen having conversations over drinks.
Oh my gosh. Whew. I'm so excited. We're going on vacation in 2 days. Yay.
Yes.
Well, thank you, friend. Love you. Thanks for being on the
Absolutely.
show.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. To put your money in your heart is donate to Subculture Inc. and clear the path for Black students today.